What's up guys, and welcome to the channel. My name's Micah, and today we're gonna address the low to no coolant level concern or problem that people seem to be experiencing on the 2024 Kawasaki Ninja ZX-6R. So what I've seen online is a lot of people look at the coolant reservoir on the right side of their motorcycle and they're not seeing any coolant in that, and they're thinking that their bike has a problem, that there is no coolant in their motorcycle. Now when we got our bike brand new, there was coolant in that little reservoir. It wasn't quite up to the low line. There's a low line and a full line. It had some coolant in it, but it wasn't quite up to the low line. But I wasn't gonna touch anything. I was just gonna ride it. I was gonna break in the motorcycle and see if that motorcycle warming up kind of pushed some coolant into that tank. Now what that tank is a reserve overflow tank. So just because you might not see any coolant in that tank on the side of your bike doesn't necessarily mean that your bike doesn't have coolant in it or is low on coolant. So we have 600 miles on our motorcycle now. We just did our break-in oil change and our coolant level is non-existent in that reserve tank now. So I don't know exactly where the issue is, if as your motorcycle kind of breaks in, as those coolant hoses kind of swell, as your coolant system burps any air bubbles that it had in it out. But it seems common enough that people are not having the proper coolant level in that reserve tank. So today we've got some Kawasaki motorcycle coolant. We are going to be adding coolant to our motorcycle to the proper level that it should be at in that reserve tank. I'm gonna show you the easiest way to do that, what kind of coolant you need to use. You should have no questions by the end of this video, and your motorcycle should be ready to go if you follow this process. So without further ado, let's rip into it, guys. All right, so we're on the right side of our motorcycle. That reserve overflow coolant tank is gonna be right behind this side fairing on your bike. I'll bring you in here so you can see this better. But you can see this little white tank in there, and you can see a couple lines maybe. There's a low line right here, and then up towards the top you'll see another line. So there's an F by the top line, there's an L by the bottom line. So your coolant ideally should be in between these two lines in your reserve tank. Now if you look up a little bit higher here, you can kind of see this black cap. Now that is going to be how we fill our coolant tank. So you may or may not be able to see that cap up there, but it's just a little black cap. It's about 1.5 inches wide. It's not a locking cap. You don't have to push it in to screw it off. You can just turn it counterclockwise to take that off. Now, a lot of people think that in order to fill that coolant tank up, they're gonna have to take off a bunch of their side fairings, that it's gonna be kind of a process, but that's not the case at all. If you have the right funnel, you are able to just get in here with your hand and pull that cap off, and we can add coolant to our reserve tank without any tools, nothing at all. So let's do that. So what I'm gonna do is just with my left hand, I'm gonna kind of reach up in that fairing there. You kind of have to get your arm and hand at the right angle, but you can just take that cap off. I've got it loose, okay? And voila. So our cap is off now. So now we have access, we're able to fill our tank. So the kind of funnel that you're gonna want for this is something with a very skinny end like this and something that is bendable. So I actually got this specific one at Walmart. It was 88 cents. But so what I'm gonna do is just fit this end in between my side fairings there and put it in our overflow tank. I will just kind of bend our funnel up. So now the end is slightly angled down. You know, I have our spout up here, so now I'm able to add coolant to that reserve overflow tank. So before we do that, I'm gonna go over coolant really quick with you guys. So the coolant that we are putting in is gonna be this Kawasaki Aluma Cool. So this is the exact coolant that your bike has from the factory. You're not gonna wanna put just any generic automotive antifreeze or coolant in your motorcycle. You need specific formulas for these systems and these engines. So you're gonna need an ethylene glycol based coolant. It's gonna need to be silicate free. And if you put a coolant in your bike that does not satisfy those requirements, you're gonna clog up your whole system. Your bike is gonna run hotter than it needs to be. You're gonna cause a world of problems for yourself. So there is only two types of coolant that I would put in your 2024 ZX-6R if I were you. The first one obviously is this Kawasaki Aluma Cool, what it comes with from the factory. And then the second one is gonna be Honda's version of this, their HP coolant for motorcycles, ATVs. Honda's HP motorcycle coolant is the exact same formula, exact same thing as this. So that Honda HP coolant is much easier to find. You know, I'll put a link to it on Amazon that you can get a quart of it for yourself. It's $16 a quart. There is only one store on Amazon that sells this Kawasaki Aluma Cool, and they do a 4-pack and it's $54. I'll also put a link to that in the description, you know, in case you guys needed to flush your whole coolant system for any reason. But if I were you, I would just get the 1 quart of the Honda HP coolant. Like I said, link will be in the description. All right, so we are all ready to add the coolant to our motorcycle. So I'm just gonna be watching that level on the side. You know, this level is supposed to be measured as the motorcycle is cold. So our bike has not been started, the engine is icy cold, so I'm just gonna fill up that reservoir until it's between the low and full lines there. So we'll slip our little funnel in, and with the other hand, I will kind of pour our coolant in. We're about to the low line. Okay, we just hit the low line, so I'll put a little bit more in there and we'll have it between the low and full line. All right, so that looks about good right there. I'll take our funnel out. We will just take our factory cap and we'll kind of reach in there all clever like. That is kind of a funny angle, but you can get to that and you can do that without taking off your side fairings. All right, we've got it started. So I might reach in there with my right hand actually, just to get it nice and snug. A little bit more. All right, that feels good. So now we can button up our coolant. You know, gosh, we didn't use very much of that. So looking at our quart here, we're down to about the 26 ounce mark. So if we started with 32 ounces, I mean, we only put 6 ounces in our reservoir. So you can see that green coolant level. Our full line is up here, our low line is down there. It splits the difference, it's right in the middle. So now we'll start up our motorcycle, we'll let it warm up, and we'll see if that water pump pulls in any of that coolant. Like I said, it's just a reserve tank, an overflow tank, so your bike can pull coolant out of there, it can push coolant into there. So as your system gets hot, sometimes you will see that coolant level rise a little bit, and as your bike cools off, sometimes it will pull coolant from that reserve tank. So that's why we just put it right between that low and full line. So let's fire it up here. Alright, so our motorcycle's been running for a while. You know, if you look at the temperature gauge, we're at 186 degrees. So when we come down and look at the coolant level, if anything, it's gone up a little bit. It certainly hasn't gone down. So our motorcycle hasn't taken in any of that coolant that we put in the reserve tank. So, and everything looks to be good to go on our bike now. You know, I don't know exactly why those coolant levels drop or kind of disappear in that reserve tank. You know, I used to work at a dealership and we sold plenty of Kawasaki's, and I don't anymore, so I can't just walk to the other room and ask a tech why that happens. So I'm unsure if it's the way the coolant system is in this bike, that Kawasaki puts enough coolant in that reserve tank that after you start riding and running your bike, you know, it burps any air bubbles out of that system and it pulls the coolant that it needs out of that reserve tank to top everything off, and that's why people are seeing kind of a low or non-existent coolant level in that overflow tank. But as you can see, we warmed up our motorcycle to operating temp, and it did not take any of that coolant that we put in our reserve tank. So our actual coolant system wasn't low on coolant at all. We just didn't have the proper level in our reserve tank. So hopefully that helps some of you guys out. You know, don't necessarily be alarmed or think that there is something wrong with your bike if you don't see a coolant level there. You know, just get the proper coolant and top that off. You don't need any tools. Just get the coolant that, you know, we use, the Kawasaki Aluma Cool, or get that Honda HP coolant. I'll have the links in the description. I'll even have a link to a funnel like the one we use, so you don't have to go searching for that. And if you take your motorcycle to the dealership for the first service, you know, they should top that off for you. In addition to changing your oil, retorquing any bolts, you know, that are loose, getting everything to spec. Now, if you take your bike into a dealership for the first service and they do not top off that coolant, I probably would not go back to that dealership if I were you. But since we do all of our own work and do all of our own services, you know, obviously we are the ones who kind of have to keep an eye on stuff like that. So hopefully that eliminates any confusion that anybody had. You know, I had seen all these videos out there. People were thinking that something was wrong with their bike, or they were mad at their dealership, you know, thinking that their dealership didn't do their job. And I don't think you can assume that. I think there is just something about these coolant systems that right when you get them, you know, when they just have 1 or 2 miles on them, they will suck in some coolant, whatever coolant was in that reserve tank, into the cooling system. Then they're to the proper level. You know, there's no coolant then in your reservoir, but your bike is full on coolant in the actual system. So I think that might just be kind of a funny quirk about these 24s, but I figured I'd just turn the camera on and kind of take you guys with as we topped off our system and tried to answer some questions about that. So like the video if this helped you out, subscribe if you guys want to see more, and until next time, have a wonderful night, guys.
Handle my business.